In this video, you're going to learn about periodical sources. Let's start by defining periodicals. A periodical is something that is published at a regular interval. That's where the word periodical comes from, the fact that the source is published periodically. And the different types of sources have recognizable intervals. Newspapers are typically published daily. Magazines are usually published weekly or monthly. And academic journals are typically published monthly or quarterly, which means they come out every 3 months. Let's take a closer look at each of these types. This is a cover of a hard copy of the New York Times. And we can see right on the front page that this is published daily. Newspapers usually not only have a specific date, but also the day of the week that the paper was published. Newspapers are typically written by journalists for a general audience. Sometimes you get guest reporting by an expert in the particular area that the article is about, but most often the articles there are written by journalists. So that's why we consider newspapers to be popular sources. They're written for general public consumption. So they're going to have language that is accessible by a wider audience. This is where it gets a little bit tricky when you're citing newspapers. Newspapers are periodicals. When you have an actual hard copy of the newspaper in your hand, if you get the New York Times delivered to your home and you open it and you use the article that's getting newsprint on your fingers, then you cite it as a newspaper. Most of you are going to be accessing these articles online. And when you access a news article online, you cite it as a web page from a website. And this is because of the way that online articles get published and how that's different from the periodical. The New York Times comes out once a day. It's delivered once a day. The website is updated constantly, continually. They might make edits to an article from a previous day, the next day. So because the website articles are actually published irregularly, they don't follow the same citation guidelines as do the periodical versions. So again, newspapers accessed online are going to be cited as web pages from websites. Magazines are fairly similar to newspapers in terms of both audience and citation guidelines. Newspapers are typically published weekly or monthly, and when they're monthly, usually the date is going to only have the month. We see here this Atlantic cover shows us it was published in April 2020. Some magazines have volume and issue numbers. Like newspapers, magazines are written by journalists for a general audience. Some magazines, like newspapers, are considered more authoritative than others because of the quality of the writing and the depth of the reporting. So the New York Times is considered a very authoritative newspaper source. The Atlantic is considered a very authoritative magazine source. So is the New Yorker. And that's because the articles are just very thoroughly researched and reported. You're going to get richer content from a lot of these sources than you will from some other magazines that come out more frequently. These are popular sources. Again, they're for the general public. And just like newspapers, they're only cited as periodicals if you're using a hard copy of the magazine or if you're getting a PDF of a hard copy that you access through a database. Most of your database access is going to be just the general copy of the article rather than a PDF. But again, if you're going online and you just search the Atlantic and you're accessing it through Google, then you're citing that as a web page from a website. Finally, academic journals. Academic journals are usually published monthly or quarterly. So we can see January through March, that's 3 months. They almost always have volume and issue numbers. Academic journals differ from magazines and newspapers, both in terms of the writing and the audience. Academic journals are written by scholars for an academic audience. So in other words, the people writing the articles in academic journals are experts in whatever area it is they're writing about. They're conducting research on the topic that they have an expertise in. So here we have the Journal of Research in Childhood Education. So the people doing that research, what their job is to study childhood education. They conduct studies. And then they're expecting the people reading this are going to be other childhood education researchers or other scholars, often students at universities or sometimes high school students who are working on fairly high-level, in-depth research. That's why we consider these to be scholarly sources as opposed to popular sources. Academic journals are also peer-reviewed, and this is a really important distinction. Peer review means that the research they've conducted gets sent out to other scholars in this area, and they evaluate it and basically approve it and say, yes, it looks to me like they followed the guidelines that they needed to conduct this study. This is a sound study. This is valid research. And so that adds a layer of credibility to any source you're looking at that has been peer-reviewed. Journal articles are always cited as journal articles regardless of how you access them. You're often, almost always going to access these through databases. One of the best databases for journal articles is called JSTOR, which stands for Journal Storage. And they have, I think, thousands of different academic journals there with articles full text. So if your library subscribes to that database, which ours does, that's a really great source for accessing academic journal content. And then let's keep in mind that databases can be used to access all different types of periodicals. So databases are not a type of source. They provide access to a wide variety of types of sources. And we're going to take a look now at one of those databases that helps us understand helps us access a variety of types of sources. So let's say I want to conduct research on women who are entering STEM fields. I'm going to start with opposing viewpoints in context because I know that this is a database that has lots of different types of sources in it. Contents include pro-con viewpoint essays, topic overviews, 300 primary source documents, biographies, court cases, periodicals, statistical tables, you name it, it's here. So once I get to this page, I'm going to type in my search terms, remembering that I might have to play around with a few different variations to get some good sources. So then I'm taken to the results page. And one of the nice things that opposing viewpoints does is it tells us what type of source we're going to be looking at. So it breaks it down for you in the results. And then as you go through the results table, it's organized by the type of source. So that's one really good way to help you know what you're looking at. I'm going to scroll down to magazines since we're talking about periodicals. Supporting women in STEM from American Scientist. So opposing viewpoints organized this as a magazine source, and I see it has a volume number and issue number, as well as a monthly date, which sounds like what I know about magazines. You can also find out more about the sources in opposing viewpoints by clicking the hyperlink where the from content is. So it gives you more information about that specific source, describes it. They call it a magazine/journal. Probably it's under magazines because I don't believe this one is peer-reviewed. But the good news is when you're formatting an MLA citation with a magazine or journal, they basically look the same. So you don't have to worry too much about that distinction. Let's take a look at another type of source. News articles. So this gives me a very specific date, which I know to be true of news articles. It has a particular place location, which is often true of news articles. If I click into the source, I can see more about what this source is. Canadian News. And let's look finally at an academic journal. PLOS One says magazine or journal. Its frequency is irregular. One of the things that I noticed, I don't see it here, but I noticed it on our main page here, is that it's peer reviewed, which is one of the things that differentiates academic journals from magazines. So now just a quick review. What did we learn from this video? The takeaways. Periodicals are published at regular intervals. That's what periodical means. Newspapers and magazines are popular sources, whereas academic journals are considered scholarly. If you access the newspaper or magazine article online, you're going to cite it as a website, a web page from a website technically. You can differentiate periodicals from non-periodicals by looking closely at the date. Periodicals will have specific dates, whereas non-periodicals usually only include the year of publication. Finally, you can access all different types of sources by using library databases. Those databases usually include clues that tell you what type of source you're looking at.